to another book event video. I haven't had one of these in a while. Tonight I was at Tattered Cover in Denver for the book event, which was kind of like not the launch because it came out yesterday, but the Denver launch. Let's have multiple launches for My Plain Jane, which is by Cythia Hand, Brodi, Ashton and Jodi Meadows. I saw this event and I knew I wanted to go to it. I haven't read My Lady Jane, which was the sort of retelling of the story of Lady Jane Grey. However, I met people at the event and heard the authors talk about it at the event, and so I have immediately come home and downloaded it on audiobook. So probably by the time this video goes up, I will have read My Lady Jane. This is My Plain Jane, which is a retelling of Jane Eyre. They read some from the book, which you will see in the video, and it was amazing. The whole evening was hilarious. So I am going to leave you with my vlog footage from that event. Make sure if you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed the event, that you give it a thumbs up, and make sure you are subscribed to see more of this kind of video, as well as obviously reviews of the books coming up soon. I also have some hauls and other things in the pipeline, so make sure you're subscribed for that. I will leave you with the vlog footage from this evening. Thank you very much for watching. So I am heading to Tattered Cover for the event tonight, but it's so warm. Thankfully I've already popped in and bought my book, and thankfully there's lots of air conditioning in there, but I still need to go and get a coffee first, definitely.
Trip together before we all met up, and separately they approached me and said, Jodi, I feel like Jane is not a mouse, she might be a ferret. And then the other one came up and said, I think Jane might be a ferret. And I was like, you guys are just being nice to me because you know I like ferrets.
It's her personality.
I don't think we even discussed it.
No, they said
we between ourselves.
No, yeah.
They swear there was no conspiracy, but I am still suspicious. So,
but you got to write about ferrets.
I did.
So that's a happy ending.
Yes. And there's a ferret on the spine of the book. So.
And those are some of my favorite scenes where she's, she's a ferret and he has no idea what she is. So.
Yeah. Or when they go to the tavern and the other people are like trying to figure out what it is.
Yeah.
It's like, oh crap, it's my wife. That was one of my favorite lines ever.
What is that thing? It's my wife.
And if you ever are bored, just look up found cat snake. Just Google it.
Oh my god.
You'll love
Google
it.
it now. Found cat snake. Yeah.
No, they wait until the event's
No,
over.
do it now. And then you're gonna get a pop quiz. What color was the cat snake? All right.
So can we expect a hedgehog in the next book?
Hopefully.
Yeah. I want a literal hedgehog, like in the book. I would keep him in the book, and I open the book. Surprise! Mike.
That could get not good for the hedgehog. However,
But adorable. Everyone else.
you know, like the picture books that have pop-ups.
Looks like watch
Maybe
me pull
we
a
can do
rabbit out
that.
of my hat. Watch me pull a hedgehog out of my book.
Just how about just a pop-up hedgehog? Might be easier.
She's very concerned about this
I
hedgehog.
know. Jodi
might have to
knows
stage an
how
intervention.
well I do projects. And so the second I was like, I think I'll get a hedgehog. She's like, don't get a hedgehog. Hedgehog's
okay.
away. She's like, that hedgehog is going to die because I saw your basil plant in your kitchen.
It's like the basil plant was like, help! It died right in front of me, and I was like, oh. I'm so sorry, Basil.
Another casualty of Brodi.
You do have a dog.
I do. I have a dog
A
half the
living
time.
dog.
The dog lives, yes.
You share custody of the dog, though.
I do share custody. Yeah, the dog is 50% mine.
And I want to point
So
out
it's the back
that
half.
half of the light bulbs in your house are dead.
I'm sorry. I've been through a
Wow,
lot
this is taking
lately.
a turn. I have a falling out.
All right, we are airing our grievances. Yes, half the light bulbs are dead, but I would like to point out that half are working. And that means I'm an optimist and you're a pessimist. He likes us half dead.
No,
and
it's-
I'm like, no, they're half alive.
It's not pessimism. She's a problem solver. So
That's
earlier this morning, she said to me, while Brody's still asleep, we could go to the store and get some light bulbs and replace all the light bulbs that are out in Brody's
Okay,
house.
now you're just making me sound lazy. He's still asleep. We should go run her errands for her so her house doesn't fall down. And we have plenty of time because she's asleep and she'll be asleep. Where were we?
Hedgehogs.
This poor girl has questions.
This is more important than my question. Well, now that the most important thing's out of the way, why don't we talk about your book a little bit? Do you guys want to do like a one-sentence elevator pitch? You probably hate this, but
No, Jane Eyre means Ghostbusters.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's our elevator pitch. Jane Eyre means
Yeah.
Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
We practice it.
what, the ghost busting or?
Yeah, we do not cross the streams.
But we also like to practice our pitch in front of the mirror. Like, it's Jane Eyre meets Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So she has not been practicing.
We just keep throwing each other under the bus.
Did you love each other so much?
We're best friends.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Right. So, I've already read My Plain Jane, and I loved it. I've never read Jane Eyre, but I want to now. Someone just gasped. I'm sorry.
Victorian England, yeah. So.
But I just want to know, have you guys read Jane Eyre? Have you all read it?
Oh no, we just wrote a book about it.
I was assuming so, but I mean...
I had not read Jane Eyre before we decided to write the book, so I really quick listened to the audiobook so I could act like I knew what I was talking about.
Really quick, like the next, 16 hours, listen to the
I read it in high school, I think.
Yeah.
I read it in high school, and then I became kind of obsessed with it, and then I watched all the versions, and I read it. And then it's been like 5 years since I read it, though. But I did have parts of it memorized. Wow.
So different levels of commitment to Jane Eyre.
Low, medium, high.
Perfect order. That's how you wanted to switch seats, right?
Yeah, actually, it makes sense. The more you get to know us, it just needs to be this way.
So obviously these two books are, My Plain Jane was historic, or the other one.
Lady Jane.
Lady Jane.
Is like kind of historical fiction.
Mm-hmm.
How much research did it take for these novels, and did somebody like really take over the research, and the others were like, "Sure, you do it." Oh, we already have.
Cynthia's. She's really good at research.
I really like the research. I
Yeah.
think it's not that the rest aren't good at it. I just really like to find those little details that are going to work their way into the actual book.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to be the one that just is like, oh, there's this little thing that happened that's so funny, and we should put that in, and so yeah, I do most of the research, and then I make them do some of it. Like I
get books
send
in the mail.
them, I send them
"Here,
books to read.
learn about Calamity Jane." I'm like, oh, Cynthia. I will not read this.
Can you talk about your dedication for My Plain Jane?
Oh.
Or the
The Leonardo DiCaprio.
My
one?
Lady, no, My Lady Jane for
yeah.
Yes. I don't.
and the
The
apology.
dedication was.
Well, we have an apology in both books.
Yeah.
Have you read the dedication for
No,
Plain
I haven't. I
Jane?
just got it.
Yeah. Lady Jane was anti-England. We're sorry for what we're about to do to your
Yeah.
history. And Jane Eyre, or Plain Jane, we said we're sorry for what we're about to do to your literature.
But it's really more of a sorry, not sorry situation.
Yeah.
We have to make it look like we're apologetic, but
We were trying to get a British publisher last time. This time we're like,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, but the book does need to be rewritten. No. Can you just speak? I've got a hedgehog brain. It's kind of spiky.
Did you have more fun writing a certain book, or was it
Lady
equally?
Jane. Oh, sorry.
That was so
They were equally as fun.
We had, I feel like we've had ups and downs with both books. We've had really great, fun times with both books, but I do think in a lot of ways, Plain Jane was harder you know. So it was just because we wrote Lady Jane mostly for us. We wrote it just to make each other laugh, and we were just having a lot of fun, and
the
we
story
hadn't
seemed to
sold
just fall
it.
into place.
Yeah, we really had it sort of figured out, and we understood it, and so it was easy. It was easier and sort of more effortless, and we had no pressure. We didn't have a deadline. We didn't have, and that's how it is pretty much with any, first book of a series. Before you sell it, it's like you just sort of write it for the joy of writing it, and that's how that was. So, I would agree. I thought it was like this whole new magical experience we got to have when we wrote My Lady Jane, and Plain Jane was a little harder, but still fun.
Yeah, it was still magical. Yeah, just not quite as many rainbows.
Quite as many rainbows.
So, yeah.
What made you decide to do retellings instead of something completely different?
Well, I mean, I was the one who had the idea for My Lady Jane, and I just thought she was such a cool person, and I loved her story and history, and I loved her. She was just so cool. She was like this bookworm before, like a book nerd before book nerds were a thing. She was really
She knew 8 languages.
She could write 12. She loved reading. She lived in this really beautiful place where everyone was always going outside. It was like we're done. It was like the best deer hunting country in England, and everybody was always coming up there to go outside and enjoy this gorgeous scenery, and she was like, no thanks, I'm gonna stay here and read, all the time. And I just identified so much with her, and I just loved her as a person, as a character too, and I was trying to think of how I would write a book about her, after I was sort of searching around for trying to find ideas, and I'd always wanted to write a book about her, but I thought it would just be so depressing because she's queen for 9 days and then she's beheaded in history, and I was just like, that would be the most depressing young adult book ever. And then I was like, wait. I'm a writer. I can change the ending of this story, and so then the more I started thinking about that, I was like, well, what if we went to the total opposite of this tragedy and tried to make it funny, and so that's where the snowball started to roll down the hill, and that sort of thing. And then the other Janes just sort of were by accident because we were just asked to write more books. And we've had time doing it how we've done it.
And we could have painted ourselves into a corner. We called ourselves Lady Janies. We were like, Jane. And then they bought 2 more books, and we're like, where are we going to find some Janes? They're like, it has to be Janes. And we're like, okay. It's a good thing it was a common name.
Tarzan and Jane.
We have had that. We've had many big discussions about different Janes in history, and could we make that work? And is Joan of Arc kind of a Jane?
Jane of Arc.
So yeah.
Arky Jane.
Yeah. So.
Do you already have another Jane picked out?
We're about to start writing Calamity Jane for the 3rd book. So.
We're really excited to see how they fit the word calamity onto the cover.
Yeah.
But you know what?
They like a challenge.
That's not our job. So.
You just gave them the hard, long word to put on there. So did you guys just take turns writing chapters? Did you all do it simultaneously?
We do it simultaneously. We each write a character, and then the chapters rotate between 3 different points of views. So our writing process looks like we go somewhere in the country. Mm-hmm. We switch off whose house we're going to go to, and
the less internet, the better.
Yeah. So we each pick a character. We get up in the morning, we eat breakfast, we sit down at a table, and we each write a full chapter a day. And then that night we read our chapters to each other, and the next day we rinse and repeat. And
So you switch chapters for each day?
Yeah, no, we each write our own character every single day, but the chapters all rotate.
So it would be on a given day, we'd sit down, she'd write chapter 1, I'd write chapter 2, she'd write chapter 3, and then we read it out loud, laugh a bunch, make suggestions.
Then I write 4.
Slightly tweak,
yes. The next day, 4, 5, 6,
Yeah, and in that way, we come up with a book pretty fast. It's almost shocking to me.
Half a book in a week.
Yeah. We have a really solid outline before we start.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not this time.
No.
We're gonna end tour. We're ending tour, and then we're going to go start writing Calamity Jane, and we're kind of like, what should it be about?
We do know who the characters are.
Yeah.
So we have a good starting point for that, but.
Was there a favorite character for you guys to write in any of them?
In Plain Jane,
Both.
Helen. I love Helen.
I loved Bran.
And I love Gifford.
Yes.
Yeah. Because he was just so horse-like.
I liked Helen, but I really liked writing Jane Grey.
Yeah.
The whole ferret thing.
No.
That was a good call, you guys.
Lady Jane, I think my favorite was Gracie. You know, like
Oh, yeah.
who to write. You know, she was always pushing the character a little, and I like characters who do that.
Yeah.
So throughout the books, there's occasionally like a little parentheses with kind of a snarky comment, or just like yeah.
Let that slip through.
Did those just like come about naturally, or was just something that happened?
We knew from the beginning we wanted it to have a certain tone, like a Princess Bride-like tone. And in Princess Bride, the book, there's all kinds of parenthetical asides.
Yeah.
Like, you know what? We
It
could do
addresses
that.
the reader. Well, in a way, yeah.
Yeah.
So we and we also wanted a way to be able to comment on. Like, it was really hard because obviously sexism was rampant in these days, and you know we had to write that in, and so we wanted to actually address the reader and be like, we know this is terrible, and I'm so glad it's changed a little bit.
I think the parentheticals work so well for that, and that if we feel like we have something to say about the situation, we have a voice to say it with, and that's how we do it. Is we make a comment about, Edward's sexism, or the number of things that
Or when the pen was invented.
When burlap was invented.
When milk was invented. When double dates were invented.
I don't have anything to do with any of the when everything was invented. I'm not the one who writes those. That's not my research, is what I'm saying.
It's like anytime we run into a thing where the logistics of doing something, like he wrote something down, and we're like, what did he write it with? Was it a pen? And then we have to go look up if pens existed. That's where it comes from.
I mean, because I love those little comments in your books. It gives it such a great voice. And I mean, I was always told, I just graduated from high school, but I was always told, like, don't address the reader, ever. So I just really loved seeing that you guys did that.
You can if you want to.
Yeah.
Don't let anybody tell you no.
All right. So what, in your opinion, is most important, plot, character, or conflict?
I think for us it's, I won't speak for everyone, but for me, I think it's character.
Yeah. I think character too.
Good answer. I was not going to say either of the other two. I was going to say conflict first, and then I'm like, no, plot. No, character, yeah.
They kind of all, it's like an environment. You have to have all of those things to survive.
Yeah.
So
If a good character but no conflict, it'd be...
Yeah.
So what got you guys into writing in the first place?
Cythia was born with a pen in her hand.
And you hated writing. We hated it so badly.
We've been together on tour so much. We started to just tell each other stories. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Jodi?
I always loved telling stories, but I didn't realize that writing was a legitimate job, or that somebody had to write books. I just thought they appeared by magic until I was seriously in 7th grade. Slow learner on that front. And it took a long time until I realized somebody has to write the books. Ideally, somebody's getting paid to write these books. That could just be it. Now I know what I want my career to be. So I wrote a shameless copy of the book I was reading. It was great.
And what was it?
It was Wait Till Helen Comes by Mary Downing. And then later...
There's a little Easter egg or two about that.
There is. Oh my gosh, there is.
Yep.
And then
Wait Till
later
Helen
it was
Comes.
Wild Magic by Tamara Pierce. Because that's what you do when you're learning. You just copy whatever it is that you're reading.
I wrote fan fiction in high school, and it's very similar, I did a lot of that. It really ages me what fan fiction I did. Anyone heard of Sequest? It's so embarrassing. I just did that. But yeah,
Don't tell anyone.
I thought Jonathan Brandis was hot. But yeah, Yeah, I wrote from an early age too. Born with a pen in my hand.
She was.
But I didn't think that it would ever. I didn't think it would be a career. My parents were very, very sensible about that, and so I was like, when I went to college, I studied pre-law. So like until I was a junior, and then I was like, I do not want to be a lawyer. Nothing against lawyers. I just did not. I just knew that wasn't my path, and then I just kind of had to leap to another one, and it worked out. I think my dad especially thought I was going to starve to death.
Oh, my mom also thought I was going to starve to death.
I still think I'm going to starve to death. All evidence to the contrary. I was pre-med in college. I hated writing because it was like essays and so I'm like, the writing sucks. And so I was pre-med and I actually got into medical school and I'm like, you know what, I think I do a lot of work. A lot of long hours, I think that I won't do that. and then it wasn't until, I had my first kid and I was kind of, having your first kid is like, it's the most crazy / boring time of your life. And so I was kind of like, I should try writing a book. So that's how it went. Yeah. I was reading a book and I'm like, this book sucks. I can do it better. And then I started writing a book because you have to start with a certain amount of hubris before you're knocked down. And dragged around. Do you need more than one book?
Yeah, I wanted to bring the big
Don't like to
bonnets
share.
that we had, but I couldn't fit it in my luggage. So.
Thank you. Cynthia's she'll always be sending us little costume bits for it. And this looks soft. It's not. This is like I'm wearing a hedgehog. Just the outside. Okay. Are we doing both of them?
No, let's just do the second one.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I think we've.
35.
All right. Should we? Yeah, we'll just read.
Yeah, we'll just read.
You don't actually have to be wearing the mask because you're playing Helen in this scene. And I'm playing Rochester, so you should be wearing this. Yeah, I should draw a mustache.
You are your Rochester. Why didn't we just do girl?
I know. Well, we didn't know which one we would play.
That's true. We didn't know until.
Would you like to switch?
Jodi loves masks. They're incredible. In the future, everyone will be wearing masks.
All right, so I'm going to read the narrator and Rochester, and Brodi is going to read Jane because she wrote Jane. In fact, she wrote this chapter, and
I also wrote Helen. I'm not that I do have favorites. All right, let's be honest.
and Jodi is going to read Helen. And originally, Jodi was going to write from the point of view of Helen when we were first starting this, but then we decided that Helen needed to be a side character, not a point of view character.
Yeah, so when I started writing Helen, I actually hear Jodi's voice in my head. So this is perfect that she's reading Helen. So.
Okay. Rochester's bed was on fire. Literally, Rochester's bed was on fire, and he was in the middle of it in a deep sleep. Let us back up a bit. Jane had been working at Thornfield Hall for several days, rarely seeing its owner. On this particular night, she had gone to bed with a full stomach and warm feet. Sleep had come quickly, for it was the kind of sleep that came to a comfortably warm and fed person. But a strange noise in the middle of the night woke Jane with a start. Helen popped upright as well.
Did you hear something?
Jane said.
Yes. Did you?
Helen said.
I must have, considering I'm awake. Let's be quiet and listen.
They both sat in the bed, perfectly still. Floorboards creaked down the hall. The faint sound of laughter floated in from the corridor. Or maybe it was the normal sound of an old mansion. After a few moments, another sound, as if something had swept the panels of the bedchamber door.
It's right outside,
Helen whispered.
You're a ghost.
Jane whispered back.
You don't have to whisper. And since you're a ghost, why don't you peek out into the hallway?
Helen shivered, and the bed shivered along with her. Oh, good shiver. She must have been very afraid.
You think this is something alive and not something not alive?
Jane asked. Helen did not like the word dead. Helen nodded.
It's probably Pilot.
Jane said.
The other night he came and scratched at our door looking for you, no doubt. It's probably him.
She repeated, as though repetition might make it true.
It was probably him.
The brushing sound came again.
Then you go out there.
Helen said.
Well, you wouldn't want to disappoint Pilot, would you?
They both sat frozen, so long that Jane's mind began to imagine she heard the noise again. A maniacal laughter broke their trance. It seemed to come from the keyhole of their door. Helen and Jane jumped out of bed.
Who's there?
Jane asked. A door from somewhere down this corridor squeaked and then slammed shut. It's not quite maniacal laughter, but... Jane flew from her bed and flung the door open. "No!" Helen exclaimed. The hallway was murky, with only 2 lit candles obscured by smoke. Jane ran down the hall, following what she believed to be the source of the smoke. She turned and dashed down another corridor and ended up in front of a door, at the bottom of which still more smoke was pouring out. It was Mr. Rochester's bedroom. She threw the door open, propriety be darned. But right before she did, she made sure her nightgown was buttoned up all the way, because propriety shouldn't be totally done. A fire was licking at the fringe of one of the drapes that hung from the 4 posters of Mr. Rochester's bed. It cast a warm light through the gloom, illuminating his face while he slept. The glow became him, and as the fire danced, its starting light softened the severe lines of his brow and lip.
Please fall in love with me.
Jane whispered. It shouldn't be totally out of the realm of possibility. After all, Mr. Darcy fell in love with the nearly destitute Elizabeth Bennet. It could be like one of those stories Charlotte and the other girls at Lowood were always telling. The ones with rich, handsome suitors. Not the ones about murder. Wait. Murder. The bed was still on fire. During her admiring, the flames had grown onto the canopy, and one burning piece of fabric had dropped to the bed, igniting the blankets.
Sir!
Jane screamed.
Sir, wake up!
She wanted to shake him, to rouse him, but she couldn't reach him without being engulfed in fire herself.
Helen!
She cried.
Help me!
She didn't really believe Helen would come, though, as Helen was more afraid of getting hurt than anyone Jane knew. But suddenly, Helen leapt through the flames and onto the bed. She looked up at Jane.
What do I do?
Jump! Maybe, if she was afraid enough, she could shake the bed, as she'd done in their room not 10 minutes ago. Have we mentioned that Helen's a ghost before? I don't think we have. By the way, Helen's dead.
Yes.
And also Jane's best friend. Sorry. Where were we?
Helen is a ghost.
Yes. Note to self.
This scene needs no introduction.
Except for this one small detail. All right. Helen nodded frantically and began to jump, and she was only able to jostle the sheets a bit. Sir! Jane. Okay. It's scratchy, isn't it?
Jodi's like, it falls off naturally.
All right. Mr. Rochester didn't budge. How could someone sleep so heavily through a raging fire? Perhaps he'd had too much wine at dinner. The flames crawled across the bed closer and closer to the master of the house. Jane rushed to his wash basin. Fortunately, it was filled with water. She carried it over and...
The dog was naturally there. I have no idea what I could possibly be doing with the water. Maybe Jane's thirsty. Go on.
Okay. Fortunately, it was filled with water. She carried it over and deluged the bed. Deluged. That word is harder for me to say.
I don't even know if it's right. Like, I don't know. I don't think it means what I think it means.
Perhaps we should consult our editor.
Yes.
Hitting Mr. Rochester's face as well. Still no movement. Jane hurled the basin up and over the flames. It hit Mr. Rochester squarely on the forehead. "Ah!" he grunted. "What the devil?" It took him a moment to figure out what was happening. Then he was on his feet, ripping off sheets and curtains and using them to smother the remaining flames. The room fell into smoky darkness.
As opposed to regular darkness.
"Jane Eyre, is that you?" he said gruffly. He coughed a few times.
Ew. Sir, cover your mouth. I mean, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
"Did you just hit me with something?" Helen scoffed.
That should be the least of his worries right now.
You were almost burned alive.
Jane said.
I heard a noise, a laugh, and I followed the smoke to your bedchamber.
She squinted, willing her eyes to adjust to the dark. Then she remembered the lit candles down the hall.
Be right back.
"You're leaving me here alone to stumble about?" he said. Jane rushed out the door, followed closely by Helen.
Stumble about?
Helen said.
As if he's never walked in the dark before?
Jane shushed her and fetched both candles from the corridor. She returned to Mr. Rochester's room and handed one to him. Their candlelit faces stared at each other for a long moment. The glow had a certain way of illuminating his features that made Jane decide then and there that his face should only ever be lit by candlelight. Much better than bed firelight. Helen glanced from one face to the other.
What are we looking at?
Jane ignored her.
Sir, someone's tried to kill you. You need to find out who. Should I get Mrs. Fairfax or fetch her?
What the deuce is Mrs. Fairfax going to do about it? No, let her sleep. He grabbed his robe and draped it over himself.
He's so funny because he's like total narcissist.
Stay here, Miss Eyre. Stay here and I'll find out what's going on.
But
Jane shivered. Are you cold? Mr. Rochester asked softly. He took the robe from around his shoulders and placed it on Jane's. Then he led her to the chair in the corner of the room, sat her down, and put her feet up on a stool. I'll be back momentarily. Please, stay here until I return. With that, he left, and Jane's racing heart began to slow. Helen plopped down on the stool beside Jane's feet.
How odd.
She remarked.
what's odd?
Jane said.
What's odd?
Helen repeated.
Maniacal laughter, scratching at our door, bed fire, and now he wants you to just sit here and wait.
Well, of course he does. It makes perfect sense.
Jane grabbed the robe and held it to her face, inhaling his scent as she gazed wistfully out the door. Reader, it smelled of fire.